Carrie Geren Scoggins, Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition, End Times Prophecy News Update.
Hi, and welcome back to End Times Prophecy News Update. We have several breaking news stories. While America was absorbed with the Ebola epidemic across the globe, as well as Ferguson, the United Nations passed an anti-terrorism piece of legislation that many are calling a Global Patriot Act.
As the 2014 UN General Assembly comes to an end, world leaders are giving themselves a pat on the back for attempting to tackle every problem from climate change to Ebola. But perhaps no achievement has been highlighted more by diplomats than an anti-terrorism resolution unanimously passed by the Security Council last week. All 15 members of the Council approved Resolution 2178, which condemns violent extremism and calls for member states to prevent funding for terrorists and crack down on their ability to travel. Sounds common sense enough. After all, who wouldn't get behind condemning terrorism? But some civil liberty advocates are concerned that the resolution contains similar elements as the USA Patriot Act, a 9/11 piece of legislation that codified much of the mass surveillance state and Fourth Amendment violations we see today. And despite these concerns, there's been virtually no scrutiny of the vagueness of the resolution's language and its specific provisions.
The United Nations anti-terrorism legislation leaves the definition of a terrorist very vague. The definition of a terrorist could be anything from someone who genuinely is a threat and has committed violent acts to someone that they just suspect might because they don't like their political or religious beliefs, ranging from Christian civil rights activists, pro-life activists, which now in the United Nations have been silenced from their legal right to protest or debate the issue of abortion. As now, the United Nations have made pro-life groups on their list to be watched and have banned their ability to speak out against abortion, calling it terrorizing those that have had an abortion. The United Nations does not support what we here in the United States have as a First Amendment, the legal right to protest the state, to speak out against government policy, and the legal right to debate any issue from any viewpoint, as well as other groups being silenced by the United Nations, those that choose to debate Islam. Anti-blaspheming laws and hate speech laws have silenced those in the EU and under the UN control of the global court from being able to speak against Mohammed, Islam, the Quran, or any aspect of Islam. Also, the coming El-Mahdi, of whom they will believe is a Christ and will want to take over the United Nations, knowing that almost 40% of the UN is now Islam, as well as the hate speech laws the United Nations still recognize, as well as the EU, Canada, and other nations. These hate speech laws have brought the incarceration of preachers preaching against homosexuality, those that refuse to tear Romans chapter 1 out of their Bible due to religious censorship laws. Again, the EU and the UN have no freedom of speech or freedom of religion. Everything is subject to censorship. Just what all does a terrorist list include, which is made by the United Nations? A Global Patriot Act. Many in America were extremely frustrated with the loss of civil rights in Patriot Act 1 and 2, and have still demanded that this legislation be overturned due to mass surveillance and civil rights violations. The loss of the need for a warrant to wiretap, which has recently been overturned. And now they've attempted this on a global scale. They want global surveillance. of groups the government does not like. Any group could be subject to attack. Remembering the American Family Association recently falsely accused illegally by the Southern Poverty Law Center of being a hate group for their views on homosexuality, which are biblical, supported by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, giving Christians protected class status under the law, as well as our legal right to adhere to biblical core values, federal Supreme Court ruling, as well as our legal right to debate the issue as upheld when the federal Supreme Court overturned the hate speech laws. Yet, the military and other federal offices have been caught illegally painting the American Family Association as a hate group. How many Christian-hating liberal Democrats would love to see groups such as the American Family Association and Christian Religious Right or Tea Party or Libertarians NRA members now on a list of a watch list to be considered terrorists? The United Nations is the very group of which are trying to do so. Again, they don't have the First Amendment rights that we do here in the United States. Another reason to write your representative and demand that we do not sign on to the global court. Moving on to another story. Our legislators here in the United States, such as Diane Black of Tennessee, are supporting a piece of legislation that would allow the Social Security checks to be cut off to the groups that they now deem they no longer like. Many can get behind the idea of, well, they're going to cut off the Social Security checks to the racists, just the neo-Nazi groups. But again, the list of requirements to be cut off is very vague and will change over time as they add more and more people to the list of whom the government has decided is a terrorist, is a threat that should be surveillanced, or they just don't like their political and religious beliefs. That we've seen in Obamagate, where the federal government, the NSA and the IRS were going after their religious and political opposition, which turned out to be Tea Party, Republicans, religious right, Christians, and the like. Now they want to take their Social Security checks. If you've paid the money in, you're owed the money back. The state cannot steal your Social Security check because they don't like your political or religious beliefs. An attempt to do so is abuse of a public office, religious and political discrimination. Be ready to file suit. If you're notified by the IRS that they intend to cut off your Social Security checks, and if you're on disability and they intend to cut off your check because they don't like your belief system, be ready to file suit. Write your legislators now, before this legislation is passed, to let them know they cannot discriminate against any group concerning Social Security or any other government benefit. It wouldn't matter if it was a racist neo-Nazi or a member of the Black Panthers, a militia member, or someone from Occupy Wall Street, a World Trade Organization protester, a Tea Party protester, of which has already come under fire with false accusations of racism endlessly over the course of 10 years. What political or religious group would be next? That same American Family Association already falsely accused illegally of being a hate group? How many other groups could lose their Social Security checks through this legislation? be on the surface, oh, they're just going after neo-Nazis. They're a hate group. But remember, they also falsely accused the American Family Association of being a hate group because they didn't like their political and religious beliefs, violating their First Amendment rights. They have the legal right to adhere to biblical core values, according to the federal Supreme Court ruling. Citing Romans chapter 1, scriptures that do not condone homosexuality as being upheld as their First Amendment right. Write your legislators now and tell them, do not open Pandora's box of political and religious discrimination against the United States citizens and taxpayers, those that have paid in this money to the state. They've been paying in Social Security since they were 18, and they deserve the money back. We do understand that over 50% of the over age 18 population is now baby boomers and have retired. It is bankrupting Social Security, but the answer is not political and religious discrimination to just cut off the checks of those that you disagree with their beliefs. It violates their constitutional civil rights. This has been another edition of End Times Prophecy News Update. Thank you for listening.
Stepping on the clouds and we'll see Jesus. Rising up in the air. Stepping on the clouds and we'll see Jesus. What joy we will share. Going where the devil cannot find me. Going higher and higher. Stepping on the clouds. Stepping on the clouds and we'll see Jesus. Rising up in the air. Stepping on the clouds and we'll see Jesus. What joy we will share. Going where the devil cannot find me.
This has been another edition of Carrie Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter Bible Prophecy Times Edition, End Times Prophecy News Update.